Hey, good afternoon, and thank you all for coming to our third DuraMAT webinar. My name is Teresa Barnes, and I'm the director of the DuraMAT Consortium. Our goal with these webinars is to provide some basic information about DuraMAT work and other topics that inform and guide how we do DuraMAT work. One of the things that is very central to DuraMAT's mission is a central data hub or a central data resource for heterogeneous PV data. And so today we're going to hear about the DuraMAT DataHub. Historically, PV data has been very difficult to share and exchange between projects because it's highly heterogeneous. A lot of it can be proprietary. Sometimes it's incomplete. Often, time series data requires extensive filtering and quality control to be usable. Materials data may come from a variety of different instruments and locations. And today we're going to learn about the DuraMAT DataHub, including how to store and access data in there. We'll learn how to access it programmatically through an API. Our speaker today is our data infrastructure lead, Robert White, who's an data scientist at NREL, and he also works with several of the other energy materials networks hubs on their data hub development, and we'll discuss how the EMN data platform works and how it relates to DuraMAT and influences what we do here. And he's going to walk us through actually accessing data on the data hub and showing us how to work with a couple different kinds of data. As you guys know from previous webinars, the way that we do this is we'll have you submit questions through the questions tab on your webinar toolbar. And we'll ask you to hold those to, we'll do the Q&A at the end. Everyone is muted, and we will unmute you at the end if you submitted a question. But it's kind of hard to have people unmuted during the talk because it gets pretty loud. Anyway, with no further ado, we'll let Robert White take over and teach us about the DuraMAT DataHub.
So I'm Robert White. I'm the data infrastructure lead here for the DuraMAT project and a data scientist here at NREL. I know that we have several new people here with the DuraMAT project. We also have some old hands. And I kind of want to go back over a little bit of an overview of exactly what the EMNs are about and the data hub is about. And then we'll go through a walkthrough of the actual website and show you how to upload and download data out of the site, and then also show you how to use software to actually access data within the data hub. So starting off, we'll look at the energy material networks, and back in 2015, the DOE came up with this concept to be able to create a set of virtual laboratories addressing some particular energy material question. Whenever you're going to distribute all of your resources across the U.S. and a variety of DOE installations and universities and companies, you have to be able to provide a platform that they can work from to be able to both share and archive the data. We spent our first year between all of the data teams on the various EMNs trying to figure out exactly how we were going to do that. And we began to analyze the various platforms that were out there that we could leverage. The idea was to try to reduce our resource costs by kind of sharing all the development across the various EMNs. We ended up landing on the CCAN data sharing platform as the one we wanted to work with. It could get us most of the way there, but we actually needed its capabilities to be able to customize some of the interface. If we were going to customize the interface, we wanted to make sure that it could meet the various needs that were going to be addressed by the various EMNs, including things like the different workflows, the goals, the instrumentation. This provided us both the generalities we needed for a template to use in all of the EMNs and also the capability to be able to customize it to meet our needs. So what is the Data Hub? Well, it actually provides support for a variety of different types of work that you'd like to do. Included in those is like doing round-robin experimentation. It also allows you a place that you can store your data from a publication and provide a link in the publication then to the data. It's a secure archive that you can actually put just about any sort of data file into it that you'd like. It has a particular affinity for CSV files. And we'll look at that a little bit later when we start diving into both the walkthrough and looking at the API. It has the ability to capture metadata, and that's a customization that we helped build up for that, because oftentimes metadata is missing, and that's the kind of stuff that provides context to your data and actually turns it into information. It does have some quick visualization capabilities, and there's been other plugins built for some of the other EMNs to be able to visualize different types of data. And it also provides a programmatic access into the data as part of the CCAN API. But what it is not version control. So you can't work with multiple versions up there and expect them to be tracked. There is a plugin that some people are working on, but it is not ready for prime time. It is also not really conducive to be able to store large time series types of data. Anything larger than 2 gigabytes, and if it's dynamic data that's being appended every day, this is not the platform to do that. We're actually building a separate platform offline from the DataHub to be able to house and handle time series data far more efficiently. And if it ends up that you're wanting to work with time series data or allow us to store time series data, you need to get in touch with me and we can talk about how to import your data and be able to access it. So now I want to address a little bit about what the data management structure is inside the DataHub, because once I start through the walkthrough, this will kind of allow you to understand exactly how I'm moving through it. In the DuraMAT project, we've set the upper level projects within it to be sort of an association, trying to group the additional studies underneath it amongst a common umbrella. So those sub-projects or studies, in this case, from PV field data, we've got a degradation study, something about in-phase microinverters, and then an NREL soiling map down there. And those all kind of relatively connected to each other. The next level is the data sets that are stored inside of each one of these studies or sub-projects. And each one of the sub-projects can hold any number of data sets that are in there. And you can kind of consider a data set as a folder to be able to, the same that's on your computer, be able to hold any number of files within it. And in this example, if you're looking at Denver, you can see there's a variety of different types of files. In fact, the DataHub can hold just about anything inside of it. This is a CSV file, text file, zip files can be held inside of it. Now, one thing to point out is that we start applying security to the data at the data set level. So everything up to the data set can be seen by anyone that gets onto the website. That includes like abstracts, information about the project itself. However, you can't see anything below that if the data set has been set to private. And there are only two settings for the security. That's private and public. And later on, as some data has been deemed to be publicly available, we can actually change that and allow that public to be, data to be displayed. So at that point, I'm going to switch over now to the walkthrough of the actual site. So if you go to datahub.duramat.org, this is the site that you're going to land on. I'm not going to log in right now because I kind of want to give you guys an idea of what it looks like if you're a member of the general public and you've just come to the website so you can see what's blocked and what's available to be seen. I also want to mention that if you happen to be a member of the DuraMAT, and you've logged into this before and you've got your credentials, but you haven't been put into any projects, your experience is going to be almost identical to a member of the public. There's going to be very little else that you're going to be able to see inside of there. So the first thing I also want to show you is over here on the side is the help. Well, it's kind of buried under the edge of that up there, but there is a help over. Oh, okay. There is a help right there. And if you click on that, it'll provide you, it'll get you to a small web page that has a link to both a user's manual and a set of data standards guideline for the DuraMAT project. So you can open those up in a PDF viewer directly inside of this, or you can actually download them. And I also want to mention they can be found inside of a project inside of the DataHub called DuraMAT Help. So if we go back to the home page here, I want to show that these 4 buttons down the middle are kind of like your easiest access point. If you have not registered for the DataHub, you can click the register button and that'll take you to fill out some information, at which point you'll probably be getting an email after that from either Courtney, who's working with us as both a project manager and system administrator for the EMNs, or from myself to get you set up inside some of the projects. Discover opens up the various data sets to allow you to get into them and look at them. Submit data sets you up to be able to upload data, but that only works if you've logged in to the system and you have a project to upload data to. And then the data tools that we'll look at in a few minutes, that gives you access to the various data tools for analysis that are being built to support the DuraMAT project. Across the top, you've got a menu bar that goes from home, projects, data, about, and help. And I'm going to start by just going into the projects to show you what that looks like. On the projects page, On the left-hand side is actually a tree of the various levels of the different projects. And as I mentioned before, we're using the upper level point of the projects as a means to kind of aggregate similar studies underneath each one of them. So you don't see much about the projects here, and actually the center band with all the graphics on it is almost identical to the band on the left-hand side too. But if you look at just one of the sub-projects within, let's say, the coatings here, what that pops up is actually the name of the actual study that was funded, who the recipient was and the PI. You'll see who's supporting that, what the current status is, and the abstract behind it. And if you notice down at the bottom, there's a part that says data sets, and it says 0 data sets in it. That does not necessarily mean that there's actually 0 data sets in there. That just means that you haven't logged in and you're not part of it, or if you have logged in, you're not part of that project, so you don't get to see that there's any data sets in there. And so when we log in, I'll show you that that changes drastically. If I go back to the projects, I want to kind of dive into one of them down at the bottom of it that it does have public data in it, since I'm not logged in just yet, on the NREL soiling map. So this is an associated study that wasn't directly tied to DuraMAT, but a lot of its data is important to what we're doing inside the DuraMAT project. This one was done as a separate study that's supporting some development of a soiling map being produced by NREL. And if you notice, it says it has 3 data sets. That indicates those are probably public. And if I go in there, there are 3 data sets in here. All 3 of them are public resources. Occasionally, you might see 3 public data sets in here, but there might be private ones that you can't see either that are being hidden. One thing I do want to point out is across the top here is something called breadcrumbs. It's basically, it's going to lead a trail of links leading you back to the home point if you need to follow your way through the system. Along the left-hand side, you've got a series of tags, institutions, data source types. A lot of these are filled out automatically when data is uploaded or a data set is created, and they provide the information to allow you to filter whatever's in the main window in the middle there. If I go into the soiling data, there's all the files that are sitting inside of this resource. There are a whole series of CSV files. I'm going to open up one. I do want to point out, though, there's a couple of numbers up here at the top. One says project ID, and it's a big long string of characters up there, and the other one's the data set ID. Those are going to be important when we start talking about API access into the DataHub. You will need some place to go to retrieve this information, and that's the address of the item that you'd be looking for. So getting back to the actual file, if I open up the DataSite CSV, it's going to spin a little bit, and then it's going to display what looks an awful lot like a CSV table. It's exactly what it is. The nice thing about CSVs is they're actually digested by the DataHub as part of its database, and it provides searchable and downloadable information directly from both programmatic means and from inside the DataHub. In fact, if you'd like to display stuff, you can actually graph it, at which point it's going to ask you what type of graph you'd like to make. We're going to choose dates. Let's look at rainfall. It's going to show you what the rainfall periods are from January to April for this. But we're not looking at all of the records, because up here it says that there's actually 368 records, but we're only looking at 100. Let me switch over to the soiling, which is this plot, and then I'm going to increase to all of the records. No, not that number. Let's try this number. And there it gives us the whole picture of it. Now, this is not what I would call useful to analyze, but it is useful to actually do a kind of sanity check of your data, to kind of look at it, or to find a data set that you're interested in that you'd like to make use of. Also up at the very top is a set of 3 buttons. The first button here, email a maintainer, if you click that, it's going to provide you with an email prompt to allow you to actually contact the owner of this data set if you have questions about it. The next button is to download, and what that will download is that CSV file we were looking at. And then this last one will play some importance later on. It's the Data API button. And what it provides is a series of things that you can do programmatically inside of this data set or to the data set. And down at the bottom, it's going to provide a series of examples of how to access this data programmatically. And down at the bottom, where it has the example for Python, we're going to be looking at that in detail a little later on. Does it seem to want to open? No. Everybody's probably doing it out there right now. So I want to back to projects real quick, take a look at another way that the data can actually be analyzed, or looked at anyway. If we look at the in-phase microinverter study, it also has a series of 5 data sets that are public. This is actually the example that was the slides that we saw earlier. And if you click the Denver one here and open it up, inside is both the CSV and the series of zipped time series CSVs built down inside of it, along with a text file about the project itself. And if you click view on this, you also get to bring up another CSV, but this one's a little different. As soon as it opens, it has 2 key columns in it, latitude and longitude. And so as part of the CSV system, I can click on that and actually bring up a map of the actual locations. And in the DuraMAT, we deal a lot with locations where installations are set at. So this can be particularly useful for us. Clicking on any one of these tags actually will bring up the whole record that is inside that CSV. And likewise, it also has the download and the data API. And we're going to try to access the data programmatically here in a little bit. I'm going to walk the breadcrumbs back up here to home real quick. And then I'm going to look at what happens when you, or first look at the data tools. Take that back, because this will be the only point I can get to it. So inside the data tools, the various analysis tools that we're building up for the DuraMAT project, there's 4 of them inside here. 3 of them were built as part of the DuraMAT project. The other one, RD Tools at the bottom, is an associated tool that's incredibly important to the work we're doing. We'll keep adding on to these tools as time goes on, as we find more and more useful tools to support the work we're doing. There is an email maintainer button to allow you to contact the developer of that tool. If you click on the links, where it's going to take you is to a GitHub repository where this tool is stored at currently. We do have some tools under development right now that have their own websites. We will link to those also along with their code. So now I'm going to jump back actually to where the data tab across the top. The data tab kind of strips away the projects from it and just shows you the sets of data, or the data sets that you can actually get to. Notice that all of these are public inside of here, and that's because I'm not logged in. So I'm about to go ahead and go through the login process, and this is going to change up for us. So when you click the login, it's going to take you to kind of an outside site where you'll do your login. And I believe eventually that we're setting up so that once you've logged into one of these EMNs, where hopefully it'll be set that it'll get you into all of the EMNs. Some people do work on multiple versions or multiple EMNs, and this kind of saves on them having to log into each individual one. Now that I've logged in, there's been a little bit of a change. There's private data sets starting to show up down here. Also, the tags have increased. There's some that have popped up, like now in SNL for not Saturday Night Live, but it would be for Sandia National Labs. Saturday Night Live would be funnier than they are. So now I want to kind of show you, first off, your user ID number, because for any sort of programmatic access to this, unless it's a public data set, you're going to need some sort of login creds to be able to talk to it programmatically. If you're inside the website, you're not going to need that information. And so what you need to do is click your name up here at the top, and it's very slowly going to try to get to my credentials. We have a lot of people logged in, I guess. So down here towards the bottom left is that same string of numbers, and this string of numbers is something that you would need for yourself to be able to access the data. So if I go back into the data also, there's a button that is now shown up on that page. up at the very top. If you're not logged in, this button does not appear up here. But once you're logged in, you can start adding data sets into it. But you will need a project to be able to add the data set to. So we're going to go ahead and add some data. And this is what happens. It'll pop up with a little display like this. And a new data set. So we'll add a new data set to this. We'll add a description. And then it's going to ask you for tags. Now these tags, there's no set rules to what you put in there for tags, but think of the things that would make it easy to be able to search for this kind of information. So I'm going to put test in there and then put NREL in there. So that'll be something that I can filter a search from if you're on the actual data site. Right down here, you'll notice this is the author. It automatically sets to whoever you're logged in as currently, and your email address. There's a DOI tag here. We can tag these data sets so they can be cited later. I'm going to tag in here for NREL. And then for the data source type, we're going to, let's see, we're just going to put in documentation and pictures for right now just to make it easy. Depending on what you select down there, you may be prompted for some additional information. The next step is to actually add your first set of data to this. Now you don't have to add it here. You could bump out from this point and actually go out and add the data from a different location, but we're going to go from here for now. So I'm going to upload some data to this. I'm going to pick a CSV file here that I've got that's a JV curve. There is a way to select the type of format you'd like this viewed as. It's going to automatically detect the extension on the file at the start anyway, so you don't really have to tell it's a CSV or a JSON file or a JPEG or any sort of image. It'll figure that out at the start. The data quality, we're going to say it's pretty good. I hope it is. JV-IV curve, and at this point, there's a whole new set of fields down here at the bottom of it. Now, depending on what you've chosen up there for the data type, this field will change. And the idea is to try to gather as much metadata as possible that's important for understanding the type of file that you're uploading to the system. So go through this, NREL, collection date, we'll say yesterday. Type, it's a light curve, and then I'm just going to throw some numbers in here. I'll delete this later on. And then once you're done with that, you can finish. You can also save at this point and keep adding additional data files if you'd like from this point on with the save and add another. But we're just going to wrap it up there. And now if we pop back up, we see that the project now automatically set to private because all new data sets being created are set automatically to private. We need you to think real carefully about the data you want to release to the public and not automatically just send stuff out everywhere. The resource is now in there. It's kind of got the little CSV symbol now next to it. If we view it, hopefully we'll jump to that page in just a second. As it continues to think about it. It's good that everyone's getting online. We're actually exercising the system to see how much we can take right now. So as it continues to spin its wheels, there it is, it pops up. It has read in now the whole CSV. It has actually digested that into the database for this. And now if I wanted to see that JV curve, there it is. Not something you probably want to publish with that curve, but at least gives you an idea of what it looks like. All of that additional metadata I added is down here at the bottom. So not only is this metadata queryable, every element within this curve is actually queryable too. And we'll go over that later on. Since I am the owner of the data, there's now a manage button up here that allows me to adjust some of that metadata if I happen to have entered something wrong. I'm going to back up here to the data set level. And point out over here on the side, this allows you to kind of look at the metadata for the whole data set. And let's say I decided, oh, this is actually public data. I didn't care if anybody sees this information. It's okay to get it out there. If you edit the metadata, there's a field here that wasn't there when you were first creating the data set. It's the visibility, and that's where we set the security. So if I'm going to set this to public, I can then update it. And now it's a public site. So anybody that logs onto the network now, whether they're in or not, can now see this data set. If you wanted to add an additional resource to this, new file and everything like that, you can click the edit data set or edit resources down at the bottom. And there's a button up here now called for add new resource. There's another button here called reorder resources, which just allows you to move them around on the screen to move maybe the important ones to the top. This add new resource is exactly like this button, and the process was just exactly what we did a few minutes ago. So we back up to projects here. We should be able to see the new project has popped in there. Maybe. Hello. Okay, yes. So under test 1, which is where we were putting that one, we should be able to see a new project. And I want to mention that also everybody, if you're part of the DuraMAT team and you've got your login credentials, we're going to go ahead and give you automatic membership into the test project as soon as we can. That'll allow you to at least upload or download or do whatever you want without dealing with a real project, in case you just want to test what you're doing, see how well it works. We've got several of you in there now, but I don't know that we've got everybody into the project just yet. And under the data sets, yes, we are exercising this, I can tell. Here's the sample file. Yep, there's the one we actually worked at earlier. So now I'm going to go back home. And that's going to finish up that part of it. Now the one that I had a lot of questions on is how do you actually access this thing if you don't want to use the GUI and go through the web application. I want to say that I have a demonstration IPython notebook. It is up there on my public IPython page or my GitHub page. But to get to it, if you actually are in the DataHub and you go to the projects and look for DuraMAT help down there, click on DuraMAT help. There's a help and tutorial file in there. There's 2 resources, and one of them is a link to actually getting to where this page is stored at. So consider that a task that you can do. But we'll walk through this. Slides are not changing on the web. They're just slow.
Okay.
So, all right. So the shout out to Nick Wonder for actually creating the first one of these little walkthroughs that he did for the hydrogen project, and I kind of glommed onto his, kind of adjusted it for what we're doing inside the DuraMAT, and based on some of the questions I was getting from people at the various conferences we were at. The top part of this contains a lot of information that can be gleaned from the documentation for both the CCAN platform and the various elements that modules that we're using to actually access the data. So there's links all through here for getting you up to speed on that. I'm going to go ahead and set up and run the imports for part of this. This little section goes into basically the layout of the data structure within the DataHub, and this matches what we were talking about earlier when I was showing the slide of the data management structure. And then the use cases I've got in this file that we're going to deal with is how to get an existing set of projects out of it, how to get your specific sets of projects, how to pull out all the project details, and then the final one is how do I query out a particular data record out of a CSV resource. So the first thing about using the API is to understand this is built on a REST API format, which means that each one of the queries you do kind of looks like a great big long strange URL string. Each of the requests will consist of the first part of it being the DataHub URL, followed by this structure, this API 3/3/action. That will be repeated for every one of them. And then the last part of it is what you're kind of wanting to do, the action you want to do. As pointed out here in this action statement, the actions are kind of a noun-verb combination, so like project list or data store search, things like that. Those are all listed in the API documentation, by the way. So next thing I'm going to do is try to build up the, excuse me for zipping around here, build up the initial URL that we're going to use to work with. The first line of this actually is just a variable just to hold the EMN DataHub's name. And so you can actually put any of the DataHubs here, but we're DuraMAT Central right now. Next line is actually creates a string using Lambda function so that it can pin that API3 action in the middle of it, and that it'll actually take whatever you're wanting to do as your action and mix them all together. Clicking that shows that we get this right here, this link. And you can actually click this, and if we click it, this is what it brings up. I don't know if you guys are caught up to that yet, but this is the response back from the system, and it literally has all the project list in it. So what we're doing is basically this, but we're going to bring it back programmatically into the system so we can look at it differently. The next thing to think about is that API token I was talking about earlier, that everybody has their own credentials to get in there, and that's based on your API token. I've got mine up here on the screen right now, and if you've downloaded this from the GitHub site, it'll be blank. So you'll have to fill it in with your own. And all you have to do is log into the DataHub, click your username at the top, and then find your API token down on the left column, and then plug that in here. And then anytime you send a response into the CCAN system, you get two possible results. One of those is going to come back and say your success is true, and it's going to have a big block of data that gets returned inside the result. The other thing that you're might get is an error, and it's going to be a much shorter statement, but it's going to come back with your success being false, and along with the error in it. There's also a couple of bits of helper information that get passed through too. So in looking now at pulling out the project list, what we just saw on the web page a moment ago, we're going to actually pull down this way. And a lot of these steps will be repeated as we go down farther over and over again. The first thing is we pass into the URLib module the actual URL we want, and it'll actually generate a request for us. And then the next thing we want to do, and I kind of do this out of habit, even though that this is a public data site we're going to pull on in just a second, just go ahead and pass in your authorization every time you do it. And all you have to do is do this add header, at which point you just add the authorization and then API token that you were using. The next spot is actually to initiate the request itself, and that is with this URL open statement. And the response of what you get back was that big block of data we just saw a moment ago. We're going to format that down into a JSON, little neater JSON statement, and then look for only the results coming out of it. And at that point, it should go out, come back, and this is what we get in response. So this is very similar to what was up on the page. It may not look as pretty as it was earlier, but this has all of the projects in the DuraMAT DataHub inside of it. You can see there's the name for one of them right there. You scroll down farther, there's the name of the next one down there, and so forth. Since this is all public information, everything comes down easily when you query it. You didn't really need the credentials. The next one is to try to look for your project list. And one of the best ways to do this is kind of just look for the various data sets where you have permission to do something that only a member would have that capability, and that's to create a data set. So only members can create data sets within any project. So to do that, you're going to create a little Python dictionary named params and pass it in one key permission and the value of just the string create data set. Then it gets passed into this little function called URL encode that turns it into a string of the proper format that you'll need for a REST interface. Then assemble the whole thing together using the action statement. We're looking for a project list for a user, a little separator of a question mark, and then that parameter string that was put together. Now these next steps from 7 on down are identical to what we did a few moments ago. At this point, you get a much shorter list of just the ones that I'm allowed to actually create data sets within. There's about 6 of them there instead of the 40 or so that are in the DataHub. So if you want to see what's inside of a particular project, one that you are a member of, because this is going to take you past just the information about the data, about the project itself. This is going to take you actually down to the data sets. So at this point, you actually do have to have permission to see this. So I am looking at a public data set, so just in case your credentials won't get you into anything, you can still do it. You need the project ID, and that was something you could find at the top of any of the projects page. There's a little string of characters. This is for the in-phase microinverter study. I've got their project ID in there. So the same thing, you're going to create a little Python dictionary of the parameters you want to pass in, the ID with the project ID. You want it to include the data sets, true, and you don't care about who the other users are, so that's passed in as false. And then the next steps are all identical, creating the parameter string, initiating the URL and the request. And at this point, you can get all the information about the in-phase microinverter project, and it comes out in this big, long, blocky thing. But you can query out of this the various data sets that are inside of it that you might want to look at. You can also take the query farther and actually look and see what files are in each one of the data sets. Now the last one is the one that most people were wanting to know about. How do I actually get to the data itself? So assuming that you do have permission to actually get to the data files, and you need the resource ID, and that can be found inside that little green button above any of the CSV style files. And if you click on that, it'll bring up what that resource ID is. It also shows up in any of the buttons you would see marked as embedded. Will also actually carry that little ID inside of it that you can dig out of there. Once again, all you got to do is set up a parameter dictionary, this time resource ID. And this next one is a little different. It's a Q followed by the words Canadian Solar. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to search that CSV for any records for Canadian Solar installations in the Denver area. And this is just going to bring me out a list of all of those installations. And the idea is to pull out the site IDs so then I can go look at those data files if I wanted to. Everything else after that fact is identical to what we've done before. And we run that and we'll get a list of all the Canadian Solar installations in the Denver area that they were using for this site project. Here it says Canadian Solar up here. And then here's the list of them one after another. And at that point, then you can go querying for the data sets if you want, or the data itself if you wish. So that kind of brings me to the end of the walkthrough. So